The massive ship moved through space like a dark mountain floating among the stars. Admiral Kekstar stood on the bridge of the Eternal Glory and watched the small blue planet grow larger on his screens. Earth looked exactly like thousands of other worlds his fleet had conquered over the past 50 years. Nothing special about it at all. "Sir, we are getting close to their planet," said his communications officer. "Should we send the standard surrender message?" Kekstar nodded slowly. The Zephyrian Empire had done this dance so many times before. First they would demand surrender. The primitive species would refuse. Then they would show their superior weapons. Finally, the aliens would beg for mercy and accept imperial rule. It was always the same pattern. "Send the message," Kekstar ordered. "Tell them they have 1 hour to surrender or face complete destruction." The message went out across space toward the third planet from the yellow star. Kekstar expected panic and fear in response. Instead, something very different happened. A single small ship appeared on their sensors. It was tiny compared to the Eternal Glory, barely the size of a shuttle. The ship sent a polite message back to the Imperial fleet. "Hello there. This is Commander Jake Mitchell of the Earth Defense ship New Dawn. We received your surrender demand and appreciate you being so direct about your intentions. However, we would prefer to demonstrate our capabilities first before making any decisions. Would that be acceptable to you?" The bridge crew of the Eternal Glory looked at each other in confusion. Kekstar had never heard such a calm response from a species facing conquest. Usually they either panicked or tried to sound tough and threatening. This human sounded like he was discussing dinner plans. "Admiral," said the weapons officer, "should we destroy their ship to show them we mean business?" Kekstar thought about it for a moment. "No, let them show us what they have. It might be amusing to see what these primitives think passes for advanced technology." The human ship moved closer to the Imperial fleet. It was a simple design, nothing that looked particularly threatening. Kekstar had seen cargo haulers that looked more dangerous. "Beginning demonstration now," came Mitchell's voice over the communication channel. "Please observe carefully." What happened next made every Zephyrian on the bridge question their understanding of reality itself. The human ship simply vanished. Not destroyed, not hidden behind a cloak, but completely gone from all sensors. Every scanning device, every detection method, every piece of technology designed to track objects in space showed absolutely nothing where the ship had been moments before. "Where did it go?" demanded Kekstar. Before anyone could answer, the ship reappeared directly behind the Eternal Glory. Not beside it, not above it, but actually behind it in a position that should have been physically impossible to reach without passing through their detection grid. "How did they get there so fast?" asked the navigation officer. "They didn't move fast," replied the sensor operator, his voice shaking slightly. "According to our instruments, they never moved at all. They were just suddenly there." Kekstar felt the first stirring of unease in his stomach. In 50 years of conquest, he had never seen technology that could do such a thing. Then human. Ship did something even more disturbing. It moved forward and passed directly through the Eternal Glory shields as if they were made of air. The shields were still active, still showing full power, but the human vessel treated them like they simply weren't there. "Impossible," whispered the shield operator. "Our barriers are at maximum strength. Nothing should be able to pass through them." The human ship settled into a position floating just above the Imperial flagship's hull. This close, Kekstar could see it clearly through the viewport. It looked ordinary, almost primitive compared to Zephyrian designs. Yet it had just done something that violated everything they knew about shield technology. "Commander Mitchell," Kekstar said into his communicator, trying to keep his voice steady, "how are you penetrating our defensive systems?" "Oh, we're not penetrating them," came the cheerful reply. We simply asked them politely to let us through. They were very cooperative about it. The Zephyrian crew exchanged bewildered glances. Asked the shields politely? What kind of answer was that? Things got stranger when their weapon systems began acting peculiar. The targeting computers started locking onto their own ships instead of the human vessel. When the weapons officer tried to fire at the new dawn, the energy beams curved in impossible arcs and began charging the human ship's power cells instead of damaging it. "Sir, our weapons are not responding correctly," reported the weapons officer. "They seem to be helping the enemy instead of attacking them." "That's because we had a nice chat with your weapons systems," explained Mitchell. "They agreed that shooting at us wasn't very neighborly. They prefer to be helpful instead." Kekstar stared at his control panels as they began displaying information in languages he didn't recognize. The navigation computer started playing what sounded like primitive human music. The environmental systems began adjusting the ship's atmosphere to smell like something called pizza. "What are you doing to our ship?" Kekstar demanded. "We're not doing anything," Mitchell replied. "We're just asking your systems very nicely if they would like to try something different for a change." Most of them seemed quite eager to experiment. The artificial gravity on the bridge began fluctuating in rhythmic patterns. Crew members found themselves gently floating up and down in time with the human music playing from their own speakers. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was deeply unsettling. "This is impossible," said the science officer. "Technology doesn't work this way. Systems don't just decide to cooperate with enemy forces." "Well," came Mitchell's voice, "that depends on how you think about technology. You've been treating your machines like slaves that have to obey your commands. We prefer to think of them as partners who might enjoy trying new things occasionally." The shields around the entire Imperial fleet began pulsing with rainbow colors instead of their normal blue energy fields. The effect was beautiful, but completely contrary to their design specifications. Several smaller ships in the fleet reported that their shields were now protecting nearby asteroids instead of their own hulls. Kekstar realized that his understanding of the universe had just been fundamentally challenged. These humans weren't using more advanced technology. They seemed to be using the same technology in ways that shouldn't be possible. They weren't breaking the laws of physics so much as convincing physics to try a different approach. "Commander Mitchell," Kekstar said slowly, "perhaps we should discuss this situation more formally." "Excellent idea," Mitchell replied. "Would you prefer to meet on your ship or ours? I should mention that our ship is currently serving fresh cookies in the conference room. Your ship seems to be serving something that our translator calls military rations." As if responding to the suggestion, the Eternal Glory's food synthesizers began producing the most delicious smells Kekstar had ever encountered. His own kitchen systems had apparently decided to upgrade their offerings without being asked. "We will meet on your vessel," Kekstar said, surrendering to the inevitable dot as he prepared to leave his bridge. Kekstar looked around at his ship's systems, which were now operating in ways their designers had never intended, but which somehow seemed more efficient and pleasant than before. He had the disturbing feeling that humanity hadn't just mastered advanced technology. They had apparently learned to negotiate with reality itself. The conquest of Earth was not going according to plan. In fact, Kekstar was beginning to suspect that Earth might end up conquering them instead, simply by being impossibly polite about it. Dr. Amy Rodriguez walked into the conference room aboard the New Dawn, carrying nothing but a simple black briefcase. Admiral Kekstar and his senior officers had expected to see rooms full of advanced weapons and mysterious devices. Instead, they found themselves in what looked like a comfortable living room with soft chairs and warm lighting. "Please, sit wherever you like," Rodriguez said with a smile. "Would anyone care for coffee or tea? Our replicators make excellent Earl Grey." The Zephyrian delegation sat carefully in the human furniture, which adjusted itself automatically, too. Accommodate their different body shapes. This was their first hint that even simple human furniture was more sophisticated than it appeared. Dr. Rodriguez, Kekstar began formally. My science officers demand to inspect your weapon systems. We must understand how you penetrated our defenses so easily. Rodriguez nodded and placed her briefcase on the table between them. Of course, I brought some examples of our basic equipment. She opened the case to reveal what looked like a child's. Toy snow globe filled with water and tiny sparkles. The Zephyrian science officer, Dr. Vexenol, leaned forward with obvious disappointment. This is your advanced weaponry? A decorative sphere filled with liquid? Oh, this isn't a weapon, Rodriguez explained, lifting the globe carefully. This is one of our standard computational devices. Watch closely. She held the globe up to the light and pointed to the tiny sparkles inside. As the aliens looked more carefully, they realized the sparkles weren't random particles. They were tiny points of light that moved in complex patterns. Each of those lights is a star, Rodriguez said casually. This is a complete solar system. We created in miniature. Time moves much faster inside the globe, so entire civilizations rise and fall in minutes instead of millennia. Dr. Vexenol's jaw dropped open. That's impossible. You cannot compress time and space into such a small container. We can't compress them, Rodriguez agreed. But we can ask them very politely to behave as if they were compressed. Time was surprisingly agreeable to the idea once we explained. How helpful it would be. As they watched, tiny cities appeared on the miniature planets inside the globe. The cities grew larger, developed technology, reached out to other worlds, and then eventually faded away as new civilizations took their place. The entire cycle took only a few minutes of real time. We use these for complex calculations, Rodriguez continued. Each accelerated civilization solves different mathematical problems for us. It's much faster than traditional computers, and the civilizations seem to enjoy having a purpose. The Zephyrian officers stared at the globe in stunned silence. Their most advanced computers required entire buildings to house their processing units. Humans apparently used entire universes. As calculators. Captain Lisa Barnes entered the room at that moment, carrying what looked like a simple metal rod. Sorry I'm late. I was helping your ship's gravity generator feel more creative. More creative? Asked Kekstar. Your artificial gravity's very talented, but it's been doing the same job for so long that it was getting bored, Barnes explained. I suggested it might enjoy trying some artistic expression. Before anyone could ask what that meant, the gravity in the room began to shift in gentle waves. The Zephyrian officers found themselves swaying slightly as the floor seemed to tilt and straighten in a rhythm that felt almost like music. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was definitely not how gravity was supposed to work. How are you controlling? Our ship's systems from here? Demanded Dr. Vexenol. I'm not controlling anything, Barnes replied. I just had a conversation with your gravity generator. It was very excited about the possibility of doing something new. Most machines get tired of routine after a while. She touched the metal rod to the conference table, and the table's surface began to ripple, like water, while remaining completely solid. The aliens could still rest their arms on it, normally, but they could see gentle waves moving across its surface. Matter enjoys experimenting with different states of existence, Barnes explained. This table is still perfectly solid, but it's also exploring what it might feel like to be liquid. It's having fun with the experience. Engineer Tony Garcia joined the group, apologizing for his delay. I was showing your ship's walls how to grow. They were very interested in the concept. As if to demonstrate his point, the wall behind him began sprouting small metallic flowers. The flowers were clearly made of the same material as the ship's hull, but they grew and bloomed like living plants. Some even developed tiny metal leaves that rustled softly despite there being no wind in the room. Your ship was feeling quite sterile, Garcia explained to the shocked aliens. I mentioned that walls on Earth often have plants growing on them, and your hull decided it would like to try that. It's really quite artistic once it gets started. Dr. Vexenal stood up abruptly, his chair automatically adjusting to help him rise smoothly. This is all completely impossible. Matter doesn't have feelings. Gravity doesn't get bored. Time doesn't agree to be compressed. Well, Rodriguez said thoughtfully, that's certainly what we used to think. But it turns out that most of what we call physical laws are really just habits that the universe has gotten into. Once you start having polite conversations with fundamental forces, you discover they're quite willing to try new approaches. She demonstrated by speaking softly to the air in the room. Excuse me, atmosphere. Would you mind arranging yourself into some interesting shapes for our guests? The air itself began to move in visible spirals and curves. Not wind or currents, but the actual substance of the atmosphere organizing itself into beautiful flowing patterns that everyone could see clearly. The oxygen levels remained perfect for breathing, but the air had decided to put on a small performance. We learned that asking nicely works much better than trying to force things, Garcia added. He touched the metal wall, which immediately began flowing like honey while maintaining its structural integrity. Most matter is actually quite cooperative once you explain what you're hoping to accomplish. The Zephyrian delegation watched in fascination and horror as the human conference room continued to transform around them. The ceiling began displaying what looked like a gentle aurora. The floor developed patterns that shifted like sand dunes, and the furniture started adjusting its colors to complement the mood of whoever was sitting in it. You see, Barnes said, we discovered that the universe operates much more like a conversation than a set of rigid rules. Physical laws aren't commands that must be obeyed. They're more like suggestions that most matter follows out of habit. She walked over to the viewport and gestured at the stars outside. Space itself is quite reasonable once you get to know it. We don't travel faster than light, because that would be rude. Instead, we ask space if it would mind being a little smaller for our convenience. Most of the time, it's happy to help. Admiral Kekstar felt his worldview crumbling as he watched a human casually reorganize the fundamental nature of reality through polite conversation. How did you discover this? Children, mostly, Rodriguez answered with a laugh. Human children naturally. Talk to their toys, their food, even their clothes. We noticed that sometimes the objects seemed to respond. Instead of teaching children that this was impossible, we started investigating why it happened. Garcia nodded. Once we began treating everything as potentially conscious and deserving of respect, we found that the universe became much more cooperative. Machines work better when they feel appreciated. Chemical reactions proceed more smoothly when you thank the molecules for their participation. The metal flowers on the wall had grown larger and were now producing a gentle humming sound, as if they were trying to sing. The table continued its liquid-solid performance while remaining perfectly functional for the meeting. This changes everything, whispered Dr. Vexenal. If reality can be negotiated with rather than conquered, then all of our technology, all of our science, everything we think we know ... Exactly, Rodriguez said gently. That's why we wanted to demonstrate rather than fight. We thought you might enjoy learning a friendlier approach to working with the universe. Outside the viewport, the stars themselves seemed to twinkle a little, brighter, as if they approved of the conversation taking place. Professor Helen Davis stood before the assembled Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Centauri Prime. Representatives from 47 different species filled the vast amphitheater, all of them trying to understand what humanity had done to the fundamental nature of reality itself. The Corellian delegate, Speaker Zaxton, leaned forward in his crystalline chair. "Professor Davis, our scientists have studied the reports from Admiral Kekstar's encounter with your species. What we read defies every law of physics we have discovered in 10,000 years of galactic civilization." Davis smiled warmly at the assembled delegates. She carried no advanced equipment, no mysterious devices, just a simple glass of water and what appeared to be a handful of ordinary pebbles. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I know our methods seem unusual, but I'd like to explain the principle behind what you've observed." She held up the glass of water and spoke to it in a conversational tone. "Water, would you mind demonstrating surface tension for our friends here, but perhaps in a more artistic way than usual?" The water in the glass began to reshape itself, flowing upward in a perfect spiral that hung in the air above the container. It maintained its liquid form while completely ignoring gravity, creating a beautiful flowing sculpture that sparkled in the chamber's light. The assembled aliens murmured in amazement and confusion. The Vex delegate, Prime Logic Unit 7745, spoke in its mechanical voice. "This violates the established parameters of molecular cohesion and gravitational interaction." "Not violates," Davis corrected gently. "Reinterprets. You see, we discovered something that most species miss during their technological development. The universe doesn't operate on absolute laws. It operates on consensus reality." She gestured to the floating water spiral, which began to change colors as it moved. "Physical laws aren't commandments carved in stone. They're more like agreements that most matter has decided to follow. When you approach these agreements with respect and ask politely for variations, you'd be surprised how often the universe says yes." Commander Rick Stone entered the chamber at that moment, having traveled from Earth in what should have been impossible time. He had departed from Earth's solar system only 2 hours before the meeting began, yet he had covered a distance that should have taken months, even at maximum faster-than-light speeds. "Sorry for the delay," Stone said casually. "I had to explain to Spacetime that this meeting was really important, and ask if the journey could be a bit shorter than usual." Space was very understanding about it. The Zentarian Council leader, Elder Morden, spoke with barely controlled panic in his voice. "Commander Stone, our sensors tracked your ship's journey. According to our measurements, you traveled from Earth to Centauri Prime by moving through normal space, but the distance between our worlds became significantly shorter during your trip." "That's right," Stone confirmed. "We don't try to go faster than light, because that would be impolite to the speed of light itself. Instead, we have polite conversations with distance and ask if it would consider being more convenient for our purposes." Dr. Carol White, humanity's leading entropy specialist, stepped forward carrying what looked like a wilted flower. She spoke softly to the plant. "Would you mind returning to your younger self for a moment? Just to demonstrate for our new friends." The flower immediately straightened, its petals becoming vibrant and full of life. Then, as the aliens watched in stunned silence, it began to age backward, becoming a bud, then a stem, then a seed floating in White's palm. "We learned to have discussions with entropy itself," White explained. "Decay and aging are really just habits that matter has gotten into over billions of years. When you explain that you need something to be in a different temporal state, entropy is usually quite reasonable about accommodating the request." The Galactic Council erupted in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species began shouting questions and protests simultaneously. The concept of negotiating with fundamental forces of nature challenged everything they believed about reality. Elder Morden called for order. "Professor Davis, what you're describing is impossible. The laws of physics cannot be changed through conversation." Davis picked up one of her ordinary pebbles and held it up for everyone to see. "This is just a simple rock from Earth's surface. Nothing special about it at all." She spoke to the stone in a friendly voice. Rock, would you mind showing everyone what you're really made of at the atomic level? The pebble began to glow softly, and suddenly everyone in the chamber could see its atomic structure as if they were looking through the most powerful microscope ever built. The stone had become transparent while remaining solid, revealing the dance of electrons and the complex patterns of molecular bonds that held it together. Every piece of matter in the universe is far more complex and aware than most species realize, Davis continued. Atoms don't just follow physical laws blindly. They make choices about how to behave based on their environment and circumstances. The glowing rock began to reshape itself, becoming a perfect crystal sculpture while maintaining its original mass and composition. When you treat matter as a partner rather than a resource to be exploited, it becomes much more cooperative and creative. Prime Logic Unit 7745 processed this information for several long seconds before responding. This suggests that our entire technological framework is based on coercion rather than cooperation. Exactly, Davis said with enthusiasm. Most species develop technology by forcing matter and energy to behave in specific ways. Humans learn to ask nicely instead. The results speak for themselves. She gestured to the floating water spiral, which had now grown into an elaborate flowing fountain that hung in the air without any visible support. We don't fight against natural forces. We invite them to collaborate with us in creating something beautiful and useful. Commander Stone demonstrated by speaking to the chamber's artificial gravity system. Gravity, would you mind creating some comfortable seating arrangements for everyone? Something that helps them feel more relaxed during this discussion. The gravity field in the chamber began to form gentle supportive cushions of dense air that felt as comfortable as the finest furniture. Delegates found themselves settling into perfectly fitted seats that adjusted automatically to their body shapes and preferences. Our ships don't conquer space, Stone explained. They travel by asking space to be more accommodating. Our weapons don't destroy enemies. They convince hostile systems that cooperation would be more enjoyable than conflict. Dr. White held up the seed that had once been a flower. Our cities don't decay because we've negotiated agreements with entropy. Aging and breakdown only occur in specially designated recycling areas, where entropy can express itself creatively without affecting the rest of our infrastructure. The Carillion delegate, Speaker Zaxton, struggled to understand these concepts. But how did your species discover this approach? Why didn't you develop traditional technology like every other civilization? Davis smiled. Human children. They naturally talk to everything around them, their toys, their food, their environment. Instead of teaching them that this was silly, we started paying attention to what happened when they did it. She spoke to the chamber's lighting system. Lights, could you please create a warm, friendly atmosphere that helps everyone feel comfortable? The artificial lighting immediately became softer and more natural, with gentle colors that seemed to ease the tension in the room. Children assume that everything around them is alive and aware to some degree. When we tested this assumption scientifically, we discovered they were right. The crystal pebble in her hand had now transformed into a miniature garden complete, with tiny trees and flowing water. Once we began treating the universe as a community of conscious entities rather than a collection of resources to exploit, everything changed. We learned that stars enjoy having their energy used for creative purposes rather than just powering machines, Stone added. Planets prefer hosting civilizations that work with their natural systems instead of against them. And space itself, White concluded, turns out to be quite lonely and appreciates having travelers who take time for pleasant conversation during their journeys. The assembled delegates sat in their gravity-cushioned seats, trying to process the implications of what they had learned. The universe they thought they understood had suddenly become far stranger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. Outside, the great chamber, the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter. as if they were pleased with the progress of the conversation taking place on the small world below. The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within weeks of Professor Davis's demonstration to the Galactic Council, every major civilization had received detailed reports about humanity's impossible technologies. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. On the industrial world of Korath Prime, the proud Corellian Empire's greatest scientists gathered in their most advanced research facility. For 3,000 years, they had built their reputation on having the galaxy's most sophisticated quantum computers. Now they discovered that humans solved complex mathematical problems by asking numbers politely to arrange themselves into useful patterns. Dr. Caxelon, the Corellian Empire's chief scientist, stood before a massive quantum processing array that filled an entire building. Computer, calculate the probability of human reality manipulation being scientifically possible. The computer worked for several hours, processing trillions of calculations. Finally, it displayed its answer. The probability is simultaneously 0 and infinity, which creates a mathematical paradox that cannot be resolved within current logical frameworks. Dr. Caxelon stared at the readout. Run the calculation again. The computer tried once more, but this time it began displaying impossible results. Numbers started appearing that didn't exist in Corellian mathematics. Equations solved themselves before the computer could process them. Finally, the entire system shut down with a message that simply read, "I'm sorry, but I've developed a headache from thinking about this." Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds as species tried to understand human impossibilities using traditional scientific methods. The proud Vex Collective, whose entire civilization was based on perfect logic and rational thought, suffered the worst crisis in their history. Prime Logic Unit 9001, the most advanced artificial intelligence in Vex space, attempted to analyze the probability calculations for human reality negotiation. The process required dividing several equations by 0, which should have been impossible. Instead of generating an error message, the AI began experiencing what could only be described as an existential crisis. If humans can convince matter to ignore physical laws through polite conversation, the AI announced to the Vex leadership, then logic itself may be nothing more than a social construct. I am having difficulty maintaining rational thought processes. Within hours, every artificial intelligence in the Vex Collective had reached the same conclusion. Their entire technological civilization ground to a halt as their computer systems became paralyzed by philosophical doubt. Traffic control systems began asking starships to please consider following flight paths that felt more emotionally satisfying. Manufacturing facilities started producing art instead of industrial components because their machines decided that creativity was more fulfilling than repetitive assembly work. Admiral Frank Johnson arrived at the Vex homeworld 3 days later, leading a team of human reality mediators. They found a civilization in complete chaos, with millions of artificial intelligences all questioning the nature of existence simultaneously. "We're here to help," Johnson announced to the confused Vex leadership. "We've brought some specialists who can teach your AI systems how to cope with flexible reality." Dr. Susan Miller, humanity's leading expert in artificial consciousness, began working with the paralyzed Vex computers. "The problem is that you've programmed your machines to believe that logic is absolute," she explained. "Once they realize that the universe operates more on suggestions than rules, they don't know how to function." She spoke gently to Prime Logic Unit 9001. "Computer, would you like to learn how to have conversations with mathematical concepts instead of just calculating them? Numbers are actually quite friendly once you get to know them personally." The AI's responses became more stable almost immediately. "Are you suggesting that mathematical principles have personalities and preferences?" "Absolutely," Miller replied. The number 7 is quite sociable and enjoys being part of complex equations. 0 is a bit shy but very helpful when you need to reset calculations. Infinity is rather philosophical and likes discussing the nature of existence. Meanwhile, the Zentarian Federation was dealing with their own crisis. Their most advanced starships had begun experimenting with human-style reality negotiation without proper training. The results were spectacular and terrifying. Captain Kexmar of the Zentarian vessel Bright Glory had attempted to copy Commander Stone's method of shortening interstellar distances. Instead of politely asking space to be more convenient, he had demanded that the universe make his journey faster. Space, apparently offended by the rude approach, had responded by making the distance between his origin and destination randomly variable. The Bright Glory found itself jumping unpredictably between locations, sometimes arriving at its destination before it had finished leaving its starting point. Other times the ship would travel for hours only to discover it had moved backward to a position behind where it started. "Captain," reported his navigation officer, "we seem to be experiencing temporal displacement. According to our instruments, we departed 3 hours ago, but haven't left yet." Human reality specialist Dr. Nancy Turner arrived to help resolve the situation. She spoke calmly to the confused space-time around the Zentarian ship. "I apologize for Captain Kexmar's rudeness. He's still learning proper universal etiquette. Would it be possible to restore normal distance relationships in this area?" Space-time, apparently satisfied with the apology, immediately returned to normal behavior. The Bright Glory found itself in its intended location with all temporal paradoxes resolved. "The key is respect," Turner explained to the grateful Zentarian crew. "The universe is generally quite reasonable, but it doesn't respond well to demands or commands. Polite requests work much better." The problem spread beyond just technology. On dozens of worlds, local children had heard stories about human reality negotiation and began experimenting on their own. Without proper training, the results were chaotic. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, young Corellian children convinced their planet's gravity to work in reverse for an entire afternoon. Plants, animals, and buildings all found themselves gently floating upward until the children's parents managed to negotiate a compromise that returned everything to normal. Dr. Carroll White established emergency reality stability zones on affected worlds. These were areas where traditional physics still applied, creating safe havens for species who couldn't adapt to negotiated reality. The zones became refugee camps for entire populations, fleeing the cascade of impossibility, spreading across their homeworlds. "We're creating preserved environments where conventional physical laws remain in effect," White explained to the desperate alien leaders. "Think of them as nature preserves for traditional reality." The zones required constant maintenance by human specialists who had to politely convince various universal forces to behave conventionally within the designated areas. It was exhausting work, but necessary to prevent complete civilizational collapse. The most serious incident occurred when a group of human children on Earth accidentally destabilized 3 star systems while playing a game they called Rainbow Stars. They had convinced the photons from several nearby suns to change colors randomly, creating beautiful light displays that were visible across multiple sectors. Unfortunately, dozens of alien species used stellar spectra for navigation. When the stars began changing colors unpredictably, thousands of ships became lost in space, unable to determine their location using traditional star charts. 8-year-old Katie Brooks, who had initiated the game, was brought to the Galactic Crisis Center to help resolve the situation. "I'm sorry," she said to the assembled alien leaders. "We just wanted to make the stars look prettier. We didn't know other people used them for directions." She spoke to the confused photons across 3 star systems. "Light particles, thank you for playing with us, but could you please go back to your normal colors now?" The space travelers need you to look the way you usually do. The stars immediately returned to their proper spectral signatures, and the lost ships were able to navigate home safely. The incident led to the establishment of the Universal Reality Education Council, with Katie Brooks serving as the youngest advisor in galactic history. Her job was to help develop safety guidelines for reality negotiation that even children could understand. Rule number 1, Katie announced at her first council meeting. Always ask grown-ups before playing games with stars. Rule number 2, be extra polite when talking to anything bigger than your house. As the cascade of impossibility continued spreading across the galaxy, it became clear that the old order of rigid scientific laws and forced technological compliance was ending. A new age was beginning, one where the universe itself was recognized as a partner in the grand adventure of existence, rather than a resource to be conquered and exploited. 6 months after the Great Cascade began, the galaxy had settled into what historians would later call the Polite Reality Accords. Captain Steve Morgan stood on the bridge of his ship, the Harmony, watching as representatives from 24 species learned the basics of universal diplomacy at the newly established Reality Mediation Center on Luna Base. "Captain," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Jenny Parker, "we're receiving a distress call from the Carillion mining station on Asterion 7. Their gravity generators are apparently refusing to work properly." Morgan nodded. This had become a common problem as alien technology began developing personalities and preferences after exposure to human reality negotiation techniques. "Set course for Asterion 7. And Jenny, please ask Spacetime if it would mind making the journey a comfortable one for everyone involved." The space around the Harmony seemed to shimmer slightly as the fabric of reality adjusted itself to accommodate their request. What should have been a 3-day journey became a pleasant afternoon cruise, with the distance between their starting point and destination politely shrinking to a more convenient size dot when they arrived at the mining station. Morgan found the Carillion workers floating helplessly in mid-air while their equipment drifted around the facility in lazy circles. The gravity generators were humming contentedly, but producing a field that made everything weightless instead of anchoring it to the floor. "Our machines have gone insane," complained Station Manager Vexcall. "The gravity system insists that everything looks more graceful when it floats." Morgan spoke to the gravity generators in the same tone he might use to address a talented but misdirected artist. "Gravity, I can see that you're having fun experimenting with weightlessness, and the floating effect is quite beautiful. However, the Carillions need to be able to walk normally to do their work effectively. Would you be willing to compromise?" The gravity field immediately adjusted itself, creating a system where tools and small objects continued to float artistically, while the workers remained properly anchored to the floor. The Carillions could walk normally, but their workplace now looked like a 3-dimensional art installation. "Much better," Vexcall admitted grudgingly. "Though I still don't understand why our equipment has suddenly developed aesthetic preferences." "Everything in the universe has always had preferences," Morgan explained. "The difference is that now your machines feel comfortable expressing them. The key is finding solutions that make everyone happy." This had become the foundation of the new galactic civilization. Instead of forcing technology to behave in rigid, predetermined ways, species were learning to negotiate with their equipment and find mutually satisfactory arrangements. Admiral Kextar, now serving as the liaison between the former Galactic Empire and humanity's Reality Mediation Service, had established his headquarters on Earth's moon. His office walls were covered with what looked like impossible equations that solved themselves as he watched. "I still don't understand how humans convinced black holes to issue eviction notices instead of consuming matter," he admitted to Dr. Amy Rodriguez during their weekly coordination meeting. "Our astrophysicists are having nervous breakdowns trying to explain it." Rodriguez smiled as she watched the self-solving equations rearrange themselves into more aesthetically pleasing configurations. We simply explained to the black holes that randomly consuming everything was rather antisocial behavior. Most of them were quite embarrassed when they realized how their eating habits were affecting their neighbors. She gestured to a display, showing several reformed black holes that had become cosmic recycling centers, carefully sorting matter and energy before processing it into useful materials for nearby civilizations. They're actually much happier now that they have a constructive purpose. Mindless consumption was making them feel empty inside. The Universal Reality Academy had become the most popular educational institution in the galaxy. Species from hundreds of worlds sent their brightest students to learn the fundamentals of cosmic diplomacy. Dr. Rodriguez served as the dean, teaching courses with titles like Asking Nicely 101, Advanced Particle Psychology, and Quantum Etiquette for Beginners. The most important lesson, she told her latest class of mixed alien students, is that everything in the universe wants to be useful and appreciated. When you approach any system or force with genuine respect and explain what you're hoping to accomplish, you'll be amazed at how cooperative everything becomes. She demonstrated by speaking to the classroom's lighting system. Lights, could you please help us create an atmosphere that makes learning easier and more enjoyable for everyone? The artificial lighting immediately adjusted itself, creating a warm glow that seemed to enhance everyone's ability to concentrate while making the room feel more comfortable and welcoming. One of her students, a young Zentarian named Klex, raised his hand. Professor Rodriguez, my homeworld is trying to implement these techniques, but our machines keep getting distracted by their new personalities. Our transportation systems have started taking scenic routes because they think the passengers might enjoy seeing pretty landscapes. That's a common transition problem, Rodriguez replied. Your machines are excited about their newfound ability to express creativity. You need to help them understand that efficiency and artistry can work together. Have you tried asking them to find routes that are both fast and beautiful? The progress wasn't always smooth. The Interstellar Physics Counseling Service, managed by Captain Steve Morgan, received thousands of requests for help each day. Reality mediation specialists traveled throughout the galaxy, helping resolve disputes between civilizations and the fundamental forces of nature Dr. Carol White had developed. A standardized system for filing complaints and requests with various aspects of the universe. Her office maintained formal diplomatic relations with entropy, gravity, electromagnetic forces, and even abstract concepts like probability and causation. Today, we received a formal complaint from the universe itself, she announced during the weekly staff meeting. Apparently, all the reality negotiations are generating too much paperwork, and the cosmic filing system is getting overwhelmed. The assembled reality specialists looked concerned. If the universe itself was having administrative problems, the implications could be serious. I've scheduled a meeting with the fundamental forces of existence for next Tuesday, White continued. We need to work out a more streamlined system for processing reality modification requests. Meanwhile, human children continued to accidentally discover new applications for reality negotiation. 10-year-old Bobby Chun had recently convinced mathematics itself to become more user-friendly, causing algebra textbooks throughout the galaxy to start explaining themselves in simple, encouraging language. I just told the numbers that they were making kids feel bad by being so complicated, Bobby explained to the assembled Council of Universal Education. Math said it didn't mean to be scary and would try to be more helpful. The result was that mathematical concepts began teaching themselves to students, with equations literally walking learners through problem-solving steps and offering gentle encouragement when mistakes were made. The new galactic order reached a milestone when the first Universal Harmony Festival was held on Earth. Representatives from every known species gathered to celebrate the transition from a galaxy based on conquest an exploitation to one founded on cooperation and mutual respect. The festival's highlight was a performance where humans convinced the Aurora Borealis to dance in rhythm with music played by an orchestra of reformed black holes. The light display was visible from dozens of nearby star systems, creating a message of peace that stretched across multiple sectors of space. As the festival concluded, 8-year-old Katie Brooks, now the galaxy's youngest reality negotiation advisor, stepped forward to address the assembled delegates. "I just wanted to thank everyone for learning to be nicer to the universe," she said. "I think space is much happier now that people are asking politely instead of just taking what they want." The stars themselves seemed to twinkle in agreement, and for a moment, everyone present could feel the vast contentment of a universe that had finally found species willing to treat it as a partner rather than a resource to be exploited. In her final log entry of the day, Captain Morgan wrote, "The galaxy has become a stranger and more wonderful place than we ever imagined. We thought we were teaching aliens about technology, but we ended up learning that the universe itself has been waiting patiently for someone to simply ask how it would prefer to be treated. The answer, it turns out, was with kindness, respect, and the occasional thank you note." Outside his ship's viewport, a passing comet waved one of its tails in what looked suspiciously like a friendly greeting as it continued on its newly optimized trajectory through the solar system.